Well, help me welcome to the stage the director of tonight's film, Clement Virgo, and the moderator, Robin Citizen. I just want you to know that they had a choice about whether your bio would be read before the film or after. They chose after. So now you got to listen. Okay. All right. So I will begin by introducing our moderator. Robin Citizen is the director of festival programming in the Cinematheque at the Toronto International Film Festival. Before joining TIFF's programming team in 2018, she was a film lecturer at the University of British Columbia from 2012 to 2017. In 2010, Robin spent 2 months in Japan writing in cafes and researching Black American and Japanese encounters in Japanese cinema for part of her dissertation, and a few years later earned a PhD with distinction in cinema studies from New York University. She has published essays in edited volumes and film journals, served on various film festival juries, programmed for the Human Rights Film Festival, and was previously board co-chair of the local Breakthroughs Film Festival. Clement Virgo is one of Canada's foremost film and television directors. Virgo made a splash with his debut film, Rude, which premiered at Cannes as an official selection in their Certain Regard program, and went on to screen at numerous festivals around the world, including London and Sundance, ultimately being named Best Canadian Feature Film at the 1995 Toronto International Film Festival. The film was presented as part of the 2019 Blacklight Retrospective at Locarno, showcasing international black cinema of the 20th century. Subsequent films have included The Planet of Junior Brown, Love Come Down, Lie With Me, and Poor Boy's Game, for which Virgo received a Directors Guild of Canada Outstanding Achievement Craft Award for direction of a motion picture. Virgo's television directing credits include Billions on Showtime, The Get Down on Netflix, Empire on Fox, The Wire on HBO, American Crime on ABC, Monster, The Jeffrey Dahmer Story on Netflix, and the OWN network drama series Greenleaf from 2017, on which he also served as executive producer alongside Oprah Winfrey. In 2015, Virgo directed and co-wrote a 6-part miniseries adaptation of Lawrence Hill's The Book of Negroes, which debuted to record-breaking numbers on the CBC in Canada and on BET in the U.S. It won 12 Canadian Screen Awards and was nominated for 2 U.S. Critics' Choice Television Awards, including Best Limited Series. That number 12 seems to crop up a bit. From 2010 to 2015, Virgo presented a series of intimate annual talks to celebrate Black History Month in Toronto with such notable guests as Lee Daniels, Norman Jewison, Spike Lee, Pam Grier, John Singleton, and Chris Tucker. And so it seems fitting that he be here with us tonight to help celebrate Black History Month by becoming the subject of a discussion himself. So welcome, Robin Citizen and Clement Virgo.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that intro. Man, that's a long intro.
I've been doing this a while.
It's been doing a minute. Yes, it's been a minute. I'm young though. I'm only 25.
Of course. It's always a pleasure to see you and talk about this film. This is based on David Cheriandi's acclaimed novel, and one of the things that always strikes me when watching this, I've watched it a few times, is your adaptation captures this very specific and very rich sense of place and time. Oh, I'll speak up. Can you hear me now? Okay. Your adaptation captures this very specific and very rich sense of time and place. So it's 1990s Scarborough, a burgeoning hip-hop, like Canadian hip-hop movement. And it's a very personal story for you, too. But at the same time, it feels universal and expansive with all these themes of grief. And I wonder, when you were adapting this, did you intend to ground these broad universal themes in the intimate and the personal and specific? And how did you go about that?
Thank you so much for that, Robin, and thank you for doing this, and thank you for showing up on a chilly Monday night to see this film. So thank you for being here. David Tariandi, when I read the novel, it was a very sort of visceral experience for me because I grew up in Jamaica. I came here as a child, and in some ways, I'm a child of the 80s and 90s, and so when I read his novel, it really kind of spoke to me on a kind of very personal level. Even though his novel is about a family from Trinidad, and my family was from Jamaica, it really kind of spoke to me. I felt like I knew these brothers because I have a younger brother, and that story kind of made me think of him in some ways, and think of my mother, and think of my family. So it wasn't a intellectual choice. It was very much a emotional reaction to his novel, and then it's really about how do I communicate what David wrote in his novel? How do I communicate that, through cinema, through the camera, through a story to the audience? Because his novel is very expansive and very, in some ways, the scope is much larger than the film. But I wanted to capture the essence of what he wrote, which was a very intimate, a very delicate, and a very personal story.
It's interesting that you talk about the mom for a second there, because I feel like watching this movie as a mom with a teenager about to be more independent out in the world, certain things affected me in a way that had I watched the film 10 years ago, it would have been different, just like the excruciating identification with Ruth and her hard choices. And so when you made this film, what aspects of Brother could the Clement that directed Rude or episodes of The Wire or The Book of Negroes not have done? What does this film say about who you are as an artist in this moment?
Well, I think the difference between when I made Rude and when I made Brother was when I made Rude, I was in my mid-20s and I didn't have a family. I didn't have any children. I didn't have a son. I have a son. And when I made Brother, I was very conscious of my son seeing this film. And you can't hear? Okay, I'm gonna speak louder. How's that? Okay. When I made Rude, it was very much a film made by a young man who didn't have a child at the time. And when I made Brother, I was a father, I was a husband, and it made me think of my mother who came here with 4 children from Jamaica, and it made me really realize the courage that took. The courage it took to sacrifice and uproot yourself and go to a new country and my story and my family's stories is not that unique, but my mother did whatever she could to make sure that the 4 of us were educated, had a chance at life, and so I was a very different filmmaker when I made my first film, Rude. It was very much a film made by a young man who wanted to show off and put everything he thought he knew into a movie. And with Brother, I wanted it to, be more sort of contemplative and be more reflective, and have my own memories of growing up and my relationship with my siblings, and really kind of not just really be as vulnerable as I could in telling that story, and just to realize the sacrifice that my mother made for her children, and really honor. When we were making the film, we wanted to make this film for our immigrant mothers, and hopefully we did that.
I know that some of you have questions. I just have one question. I'm going to turn it over to you in the audience. But I think when we see films that talk about identity, particularly Black identity, there tends to be a lot of focus put on the content of the story and not as much focus on the craft. And the craft is so brilliant here. What you do with the story structure, what you do with color, set design and lighting, particularly in the house, and how the lighting shifts based on how safe the brothers are in the situation, is really brilliant. And I want to talk about the mise en scène of it all.
Yeah, I love cinema. I love film. I grew up, and first seeing, watching films from, spaghetti westerns growing up in Jamaica, and then seeing films from Hong Kong, and then discovering sort of new wave cinema, and there's a show that used to be on TVO called Saturday Night at the Movies, and with Elwy Yost, and every Saturday night I would watch whatever was playing, and so cinema and film was something that I truly loved, and so I was very conscious of trying to use all the tools of cinema, through image and through sound, and through trying to figure out how to create that sense of mystery with the camera, that sense of trying to load the frame with as much information as I could, with as much story as I could, and really kind of looking at what some of my favorite filmmakers would do. It doesn't seem immediate, but Hitchcock was a very influential filmmaker for me for this, just to create that sense of suspense. And there's another filmmaker, Bresson, who's a French filmmaker, who he's just, there's a kind of spirituality in his films, and the way he shoots people's faces, and the way he shoots, like he always shoots parts of the bodies, like hands. You will notice in his films hands to tell stories. And so I was very conscious of making sure as a filmmaker that I use the tools of cinema to really communicate all these ideas.
It's so beautifully done with the character of Francis as well, because the way he's framed always makes him so larger than life, and really gives a sense of his presence, and his presence in his brother's life, but also who he was in the community. Mm-hmm. And he's always kind of at a low angle. Yes,
it was, he's such a, Aaron Pierre, who plays Francis, he's such a, magnificent person, just imposing. And so I really wanted to use a camera to kind of capture that. And then really, there's a lot of silence in the film, and so I wanted to try to communicate just with body language through the way characters move in space, the way, how using parts of the frame to tell a story and another part of the frame to tell another story. And with someone like Francis, I wanted it to, in some ways, to play the film like how Michael sees his brother, as this, tall, magnificent leader of, leader of men in some ways, but also very vulnerable and very gentle, and Aaron has that kind of 1950s-ish kind of movie star quality about him. He's very much a matinee idol, and I really wanted to shoot him that way.
I very much enjoyed looking at Aaron Pierre in this role. I want to open it up for questions, if there are any questions. I'm also happy to continue asking questions. Yes, right there. Oh, sorry, a microphone.
Could you talk about the use of sound in the movie, the electric hum of the power?
Yes, absolutely.
Thing?
The film in some ways takes place in the summer and in the fall, winter, and so with the summer, I wanted, I don't know, it's a sound from my youth in some ways. You know, that sound of cicadas. Every so often you hear that sound, and it's such a, it just made me think of warmth. And I wanted that sound to really create a sense of memory. And then when we're in the present story, 10 years later, there's no sound. There's no sound coming from the outside. The apartment is like a tomb in some ways. They've kind of locked themselves off in this tomb for 10 years. And so having the contrast of this electric buzz and the cicadas and the kind of sounds of summer contrast with silence was a way of hopefully having you be able to read the story and to understand where you are in this story. Because I was very concerned that people might get confused about where it was, because I was trying to be ambitious with a structure where I would sort of go back and forth in time, because that's how David Chariandy wrote his novel, and I wanted to capture that same feel, but through the camera. So sound was very instrumental in making sure that I could locate you, the audience, in a time and place.
First of all, thank you. Would you speak a little bit about the scenes with the foil on the windows?
It's something that I saw growing up, you know, and you still see it sometimes if you look up in certain buildings. You know, it's usually kind of more. You know, I grew up in a place called Regent Park, and that was what people would sometimes do in the summer times when it was too hot. And it was also something that's in the novel as well. But that scene of putting the foil in the windows. I've been to homes where people did that, and it's such a striking image to me that I wanted to capture it on film. And it's really, that scene is in a way the moment where the mother is, and somehow she's struggling. You know, she's struggling with the fact that her son, she doesn't know where he is, and she kicked him out. And so I wanted to really capture her emotional sort of state, and in some ways the fall in the window and the window and the lights coming in, and that sense of claustrophobia was very important for me in the scene.
You have such nuanced versions of masculinity in this film, and not just throughout the film, but in each character, there's a real nuance to the masculinity. But I want to ask about Aisha as a character, because she's able to kind of float through spaces in a way that the two brothers aren't. And when she comes back, there's a sense that she has this, she's the character that's unstuck. And she comes back with this somewhat of an outsider perspective and tries to help Michael with that perspective. And I just wonder, how did you kind of build that character so that she can be this kind of anchor for Michael, but at the same time encourage him to kind of let go of this version of stability that's no longer serving him?
Yeah, it's funny because she's also grieving as a character because she lost her father. And when I was, when I spoke with the actress, we talked about her as, talked about Aisha as being the light in the story. She's the one that comes into this world, comes into their world, and throw open the curtains in some ways and let the light in and say there's other there's, you've been stuck. It's okay to move on. It's okay to have music back in your life. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to feel that pain, and to move through it. So for me, she is the life force that reawakens Michael and his mother to step back into life.
Yes. In the red?
Thank you, Clement. I'm Carrie Ann. You speak a bit about like location, like mise en scène, and the actors, and I have a two-part question. One is, over time, how has your directing style with actors evolved over time? Because looking at Lamar and how he kind of, he's the caretaker and he can't take care of himself, and you kind of see him slowly break down, and I wondered how you got that performance out of him. Not that, I mean, he's an amazing actor, but that's something I'm interested in. And for location, I was wondering about the living room, because it's also kind of this pivotal character in the film. Like it's broken down, it's a place of loving, it's a place of breaking down, and I was wondering about that. So those are my two questions.
In terms of the actors, I was fortunate enough to have this amazing cast, and working with actors. Every single actor is different, and I spend a lot of time trying to figure out their love language. You know what I mean? What I mean by that is that how do they want to be directed, and how do they want to be communicated with? And so I spend a lot of time really just listening and try to figure out, like, what is it that they need? And every single actor needs something else. In the case of Lamar, he's such a, I needed someone that I could point, because it's a very subjective movie. What I mean by that, the movie in a way takes place through Michael. And I needed someone, so in terms of basic cinema terms, where I could put the camera on his face and know what he's feeling and thinking, and put the camera on what he's looking at, and just to get a sense of reading that. And with Lamar, it was more simple direction, and I would, I'd never go into a scene having some preconceived notion of what it should be. I allow the artist to show me what it is that they are thinking about. And in the case of Lamar's love language, he's such a sensitive young man that, sometimes it's just a hand on his shoulder saying, try something, whisper into him very privately to try something new. And in the case of someone like Marsha Stephanie, who plays the mother, she's from Jamaica. She was born in Jamaica, left there as a child around the same age I did. Her family went to Brooklyn, so we had a shorthand. I didn't have to communicate any of that history with her. She knew it. And so, I just said, play our mothers, and that's what she did. And, and Aaron Pierre, he's a Brit. He's from South London. And so he spent a lot of time listening to that Scarborough sound, which is a very specific sound, and with someone like Aaron, he's a very intuitive actor, but he's also very sort of intellectual, and so it's just really being intellectual and talking about the characters in the story with him in a very kind of considered way. So each actor I try to work with, in a very specific way. And in terms of the apartment, it's a set. We sort of built that set because it's such a character in the story that I needed as much control over the light as possible, so that we could use the light to also communicate the feeling and the mood in the story, and so that's what we did. And the colors were important to me. It was the story in some ways is about trauma, and I was a little concerned about that. I just ran into I was waiting outside, and this woman came out, and she was upset, and she's like, "This movie's it's upsetting to me," and we talked like for 10 minutes out there, and then she said, and I said, "Oh, this is my movie," and she said. But it was great to kind of hear that, just to raw, because I was really concerned about, there's I think a valid conversation there around Black trauma on screen, and I was really concerned about not re-traumatizing the audience. So things like color was important to me, and things like light, and making sure, because it's very difficult to make stories that in some ways talk about renewal or healing in some way. I think stories are a metaphor for, the hero's journey of going through the cave and coming through and facing your demons and coming out of the cave renewed and stronger. So that's what I wanted the film to be about, ultimately.
In the back.
Thank you. Thank you for this film. It has evoked so many emotions, having grown up in Jamaica myself and having a child there as well. But what I admired about the piece, I saw the guns, but I didn't see any drugs or any smoking, and I think that was really creative. I also wanted to know why you chose the music in that other language.
Oh, the music?
Thank you for that, yeah.
She wanted to know why he chose the music in the other language, the last song? Yeah, the last song. Nimekitpa.
The music was very important, and for me, and because it was also part of David's novel, and music is expensive to get for film, and I didn't, I didn't make the film in Hollywood. I made it in Toronto, in Scarborough. So, but there were some key songs that I knew that I wanted. I knew that I wanted the Nina Simone song you hear at the end. That was very important to me. Curtis Mayfield song, Darker Than Blue, which is about Black folks. And there's some other key. Eric B. and Rakim was a seminal album. Paid in Full was a seminal album for me. And and also, I wanted this to be a wide spectrum of Black diasporic music, and just songs from my youth, like Sister Nancy, was one of the songs that was important for me, So yeah, that's why I chose the music.
Yes, in the white.
Good evening. This is the second time I've seen this film, and it's really a roller coaster ride of emotions, but it's beautifully done, and I really want to commend you on that. I want to know a little more about the actors. Was it difficult for you to find these actors because they seem so very right for their parts? And I know casting is not always an easy thing. That's my question.
Lamar Johnson, who plays Michael, is a actor here. He's actually from Scarborough, and yes, give it up for Scarborough. And I wanted someone that knew the world and that was sort of authentic to the world. His mother's from Jamaica. He was born here, so I didn't have to translate a whole lot. Kiana, who plays Aisha. I use her own background of who she is in the story. She's half Black, she's half Portuguese, and I wanted to kind of use that in the story. Marcia Stephanie Blake, I saw her in a few films. There's a film called Loose that I saw that I quite like her in. And I just, we met over Zoom, and I knew within 30 seconds that she was going to be in the film. We just sort of bonded right away. And I'm actually now working with her again. I'm currently doing a Netflix show, and I hired her again for that show. And Aaron Pierre, I met in Los Angeles. He was, I saw him in a Barry Jenkins miniseries, Underground Railroad. And Aaron, I met in Los Angeles, and I didn't know he was a Brit, and we just kind of clicked. So, you know, it was really, I was blessed with this cast, and they've all, were all very committed to telling the story. And so, you know, someone asked me earlier how I work with the actors, but it's really a way of kind of trusting, you know, like if you hire well, you just trust the actors to create the space for them, create the environment for them to do their best work.
Thank you. First, thank you for this gift. It was hard to watch, but very beautiful. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about this scene about the two brothers climbing the power pole. Because you start the movie with the power high line, and it structures all the movie. So just how it came to be? Did you wrote it like this? Was it at editing that it came, you know, throughout the movie, and just your meaning about it?
Yeah, that scene is one scene, is the first scene in the novel, but it doesn't really play out the way I played it out in the film. And I wanted the audience to know that something happened to Francis at some point, you know, in those 10 years. And I'm assuming that everyone has seen a lot of movies and assumed that something happened, something horrible happened when they got to the tower. And I wanted to play with that expectation. And I wanted to play with the fact that all you guys are screenwriters and have seen lots of movies and was trying to figure out what that was. And so part of my job is to thwart that expectation and to flip it, you know, and so that by the end they get to the top of the tower and it's a metaphor for these brothers. So it's really a kind of, as a writer, because I'm a writer-director, as a writer trying to surprise while creating suspense and mystery. And so that you're participating in the story to try to figure out what happened to Francis, you know? And so each moment you think, oh, this is a moment, but it's not the moment, until the moment happens.
Thank you.
Brother has, it's been in a festival journey. It's had its theatrical run. It's swept the CSAs with 12 awards. And some of us are watching it for the second and third time. How do you feel about the response to the film? And we heard one person's reaction to it, but what has the other feedback been from viewers?
You know, I've been very surprised, you know, because here's the thing: is that this film I haven't made a film in about over 10 years because I spent a lot of time working in television, because television is really, I can actually make a living in television. Filmmaking is very hard to make a living making films, just making films. And so, you know, I made this film just during COVID. And I thought I wanted to, during COVID, I thought, what is it that I want to do? And I wanted to make a film, like a, you know, a low budget film. And so, you know, having the film made was satisfying for me, just to feed my own sort of creative soul. And I didn't have any really real expectation beyond, you know, perhaps making its money back and the film being seen. But the reaction to the film has been really gratifying. It's been a surprise, frankly. You know, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect the embrace that the film has had. And you know, it's encouraging. I might actually make another one.
You'll keep doing this. Yes, right here.
Thank you for taking my question. I just wrote a paper on the use of follow shots in Fruitvale Station, and I think because of that, when I was watching your film, I noticed that there were a few scenes in which the back of Michael's head is framed from behind in this kind of tracking shot. and I hope I'm not hijacking this Q&A for my own academic interests, but I was curious about your intentions behind that, and just to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think, because the film is subjective, there's a lot of following Michael, like over his shoulder or from behind or moving with him. When he moves, the camera's moving. And so part of it really was, how do you communicate? Because sometimes as a filmmaker, you're trying to find images that that hopefully the audience could decode, so that the audience is participating with the image. So to try to not always be explicit with it. And I find sometimes if you have a shot that just infer an idea, that you project onto meaning into that image. And so a shot from behind of fallen Michael, where the focus, the sharps, is on his back, and you're now in his head, you're now in his subconscious. That's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm communicating. And so, so every part of cinema, what do you emphasize? Even something as simple as where the focus is. For me, it was important to not see the police in the movie for some reason. I wasn't interested in seeing their faces. And so the language I chose was to have the focus on our characters as opposed to that. Because I didn't want to reduce the story to a kind of police shooting movie or something. That to me was not interesting at all. It was more about this specific emotional journey of these two young men and trying to navigate the world. Because I felt like that, I felt I was an artist as a kid, but I grew up in a neighborhood that, you had to take on a pose. You had to move through the world with a certain amount of kind of awareness, and you kind of take on this, you start to perform a masculinity. And I wanted the film to explore some of that, through someone like Francis. When you see Francis, you think it's one thing. He is, what we historically is a kind of classic masculine figure, but then you discover that he's as vulnerable and as tender and as need of connection as anyone else. So that's part of what I was trying to do with the camera.
Similar to the restraint that you show with the police officers in those scenes and not showing the violence, you show a great deal of it. There's a reveal here with Francis, but it doesn't feel like a reveal. It doesn't feel like a kind of stereotypical coming out moment that we see in films. And it's so sensitively done, and it feels very authentic to the character in the film. How did you go about kind of writing that?
Well, I saw it as a teenager. I saw it's interesting thing about when you hang out with a lot of young men. Sometimes you see two young men who are very connected, and and it's kind of it's almost unspoken, And so I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I wanted it to really just show what I saw as a teenager. And seeing. And really not making the movie, hijack the movie with that, but just to present it as a part of the reality of this world. So that was important to me. And to, again, highlight the expectations of what you think, to sort of reduce this guy who has his muscles and who's a beautiful specimen of a man, and you think, okay, he must, but then I wanted to kind of thwart that and kind of invert that to show there's lots of young men, lots of young black men who are trying to figure out their way emotionally through the world, and really kind of present that to the audience.
And it's such a beautiful scene between him and his partner as well.
Yeah.
Mm.
Hi. It's a wonderful film, and it was a wonderful book. I have two, I think, fairly simplistic questions. The first one is, did you talk to the author at all when you were making the movie? Do you know him? And the second one was, I was constantly struck by the difference in size of the brothers, and I wondered if that was intentional. I don't think they could be reversed.
To your first question about the author, yes, I did. I reached, after I read the novel, I reached out to David Cheriandy and said how much I loved his novel. And I was lucky enough that I did a previous adaptation of another beloved book called The Book of Negroes by Lawrence Hill. So I think David called Lawrence just to ask him about me. Like, so you know, just to make sure that I was, you know, I was not going to ruin his novel. And so David was very much a part of the process the whole way through. And I would, you know, ask his advice, and I would ask his permission for certain things. But at some point, the movie had to embrace it as my own personal story, and sort of let it go, let the novel go. And to your second question, in terms of the size of the brothers, I wanted the best actors. And so, you know, one was big and one was not. And so, you know, I wasn't concerned about that. I just wanted the two best actors to represent the story. So yes.
I think we have time for one last question.
I'm really kind of preoccupied with one thing, but I think it was wonderfully done in terms of craft, the way you constantly went back and forth in time. Very nimble. It was a very difficult thing to do to such an extent, and it was done very artfully, but there was one discontinuity toward the very end of the movie that I'm just still troubled by. And that is when Michael was, you know, the mother had really completely collapsed, and Michael was totally preoccupied with her care. And Aisha comes in with the groceries, and she is really his lifeline. She's the most wonderful, lovely event in the film is that relationship to me. And yet she says, you know, he's totally cold to her. She says, we have to talk, and then he's totally cold again, and she says, it can't end this way, and he shuts the door in her face. And that was, to me, one of the worst moments in the film. It was the worst thing he could have done. And yet, just a couple scenes later, the mother's been hurt. She comes out of the hospital, and the next thing you know, the French music is on. They're all dancing together. The father's there. Michael and Aisha are there. The mother is there. The healing has taken place. I'm just wondering if that there obviously something happened to overcome that moment, and I'm wondering if that was spelled out in the novel. Whose initiative was it? Was it his? Was it hers? Did you deliberately create the discontinuity, or was it in the novel?
It's interesting. That's the first time I've been asked that question. And the time between him closing the door and his mom in the hospital, that cut, is 10 years.
Really?
Yes.
Were we supposed to understand that?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I did a bad job. I did a bad job with you.
Well, the first time you said 10 years later on the screen. You didn't do it that time.
No, the idea is that, you know, when they were teenagers, he closed the door on her, and they locked themselves away for 10 years until she shows up at that bus. And so it was, the idea is that once he closes the front door and he goes into his mom's room and closes that door, that the next cut is time is like 10 years. So I was playing with time, but obviously this one didn't. I missed that one. See, I was afraid that someone would be confused. and you're the person that was confused. I'm going to recut the movie for you.
I admit I was the one.
Yeah.
That was the clue. That was the clue.
It was a hair. It was a hair thing. It was a hair. One was braids, and one was not braids. Yeah.
If it makes you feel any better, I got it.
Oh, thank you. One person got it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I think a lot of people got it. So it's often the case that we round out the evening by having a student come to the podium to thank our guests. So tonight we have Corinne Abouem, who is a third-year cinema studies student and a scholarship recipient. And
wow.
So good evening and happy Black History Month, even though we're kind of getting at the end of it, you know. My name is Corinne and I'm a student here at U of T. I would like to begin by thanking the moderator, Robin Citizen, and the director, Clement Virgo, for the beautiful movie and the beautiful discussion. I would also like to thank Elevation Picture for allowing us to screen the broader and making this night possible. A personal thank you goes to James for involving me into this beautiful event. And my last thank you goes to the audience. Thank you for your presence and for your participation. Thank you so much for just being here. And have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you.